Welcome to today's talk, Releasing Spiritual Beliefs. I think it's so important. Hello there. Hi, Maria. It is so important to take time to contemplate our own belief system. We may not even know that we're holding ourselves back because we have some hidden spiritual belief. I'd like to share with you my own story of a personal spiritual journey when I left corporate Wall Street to go to India, where I stayed and studied at ashrams and spiritual centers. I was very passionate about learning meditation from the source. I wanted to go to the root of where meditation began in India through ancient texts, through yoga. And I had a very interesting experience through this. So I had changed my name. I was born with the name Louise, and I changed my name to Sura. And I received this name through meditation. It took a process of a couple of years, actually, from the time I wanted to change it. So I kind of had this persona. The people that knew me in my old job and work on corporate, they knew me as Louise. And now here I became spiritual Sura as I embarked on this new life on the road, backpacking through Asia and staying in these spiritual ashrams. So I kind of automatically had that shift. And when I started living at these centers, I noticed that I took on what I felt were spiritual qualities. So when you go to any group, whether it's on Wall Street or at a yoga center or in some community program, there is oftentimes an unspoken agreement about how you're expected to act, behave, and be. And in this case, be spiritual. So for me, being spiritual meant being light and easygoing, having a smile on my face, being quiet, not doing anything to cause tension or rocking the boat. These were some of the things that began to happen. And I started to kind of become this wispy, floaty, ungrounded kind of person that I really wasn't. But I didn't realize that I was becoming a shell of myself until several years later, when I realized that I had moved so far from my authentic self because there were all these unspoken things that you needed to be in order to be considered spiritual. And even learning some of the spiritual practices. For example, and I'm just going to say some of the things that I learned. In spirituality, you're not supposed to have money. There is that belief that you're expected to give up all your worldly belongings, put on a basic loincloth and go sit on a mountaintop and forsake anything to do with the real world. So that was one kind of belief. And you're not supposed to charge for your work either. If it's truly spiritual, it should be free and freely given. So these are some of the ideas and beliefs, as well as you have to self-sacrifice. If you don't put yourself last and deny your needs and even in a sense torture yourself, then you're not being spiritual, because being spiritual is a hard thing to be. So there was a lot of what I experienced as control, restraint, austerity. You can have no sexual desire or pleasure. Sex is wrong. Sex is a sin. Sex should be controlled. These types of beliefs that actually for me, meditation became a practice from here on up. There was no speak of sexual energy, the fact that you had sexual genitalia, the fact that you had sexual desire. None of that was spoken about or allowed. It was just agreed upon that you don't do that or talk about that. Yet it's such an inherent part of our human nature is sex. This is a part of our life force energy. And so for me, I became very cut off, almost like from the waist, I would say from the head and shoulders down. my practice became very disconnected because now my practice became about mental effort. Meditation, even though we were practicing yoga, my whole sense of being present was about being up here. In this part, it was about how I could do that mentally. And I felt really disconnected from the emotions because there was also this belief that you need to transcend your emotions. And that if you're emotional, that's, either a bad thing or it's something you need to be present to so that you can just get on with it and move on. So you can go through it. And so these were some of the beliefs that I began to adhere to. And what I noticed is that I became a smaller version of myself. Here I was before, I had a lot of impact and power in the work that I had done. But now, having, spent a lot of time at the ashrams where you're not really allowed to speak the truth, where that feeling of expressing yourself fully really wasn't there. And for me, a lot of what I've learned is um, the feeling and the safety of fully being able to creatively express yourself, having that level of freedom. Um, so that was something I noticed, is that I became very afraid to speak truth. It was about being quiet and silent. So I want to address this because I think that there are so many hidden spiritual beliefs that we haven't fully examined and looked at that can keep us from really going deep in our own practice, and that you don't need to have any beliefs at all to practice meditation and to have a really deep spiritual practice. You don't have to believe in any dogma, any doctrine, any way of life. You don't have to eat this or just eat that, or, sit this way. Meditation isn't just the form and structure. It's not just about sitting still in a perfect lotus pose. It's really about your deep inner process and what's happening for you and that transformative experience that you're going through. That's what it's about. It's not about what you look like and how you practice. It's really about, are you connecting to a true sense of freedom and expression, peace, well-being, and bliss. And sometimes you do what I found. Joseph Campbell said, um, follow your blisters. He really meant follow your blisters to get to the bliss, because sometimes it is about going deep into the pain. And meditation is a very messy, emotional, crazy, chaotic experience. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So what I found for me personally and my path is I decided to take a conscious departure from all tradition and from the ashram way of life where, every hour of your day was structured and planned. It was wake up at the crack of dawn, practice yoga and meditation for 3 hours. Everything was planned. We practiced on concrete. I did headstands on concrete. I stayed in a concrete hut. It was very rigorous and austere. And that was one way to learn. And I appreciated having the time to learn that way, but I didn't feel like I had the space and the nurturing and the resource to really be held in my own authentic process of meditation. When there's that much rigor and I would say masculine kind of energy, more of a yang energy focus, I didn't feel like there was that space to drop in and to feel my emotions, to cry like in a really messy, crazy way in the middle of a peaceful group meditation where everybody else is in a different state than what I'm truly feeling. And I don't want to disrupt that peace in the group. So I think it's very important to have your own practice in addition to group practices. But even if you're in a group, to carefully examine and notice if at any time you feel the pressure to be something that you're not, and to adopt something, to put it on, to take it on, where I personally felt I was still being put into a box, and that meditation still felt like a box. Meditation was about how long I sat for, how I sat, the way I did it, the lineage I learned from, and none of that really matters. So if you ever feel like you're being boxed into something, that's just your spirit letting you know maybe this isn't in alignment. And the way that you know your beliefs or your preferences support you is that you feel supported. Just by that thought, it feels supportive, it feels inspiring, it feels freeing, like expansive. It doesn't feel heavy. There's no pressure, and there's no silent pressure to act or behave in a certain way. You don't have to be a good girl or a good boy to meditate. You don't have to forsake all your worldly belongings to to meditate and to practice and share meditation. You can just be who you are, and it's perfectly enough. It's perfectly good. And the reason I also want to address this, and I'd like to pause in a little bit to see your questions and your comments, is that there is at this time, I would say, these trailblazers, leaders, light workers, healers, teachers, leaders who want to really work from the heart center, where you're wanting to, in a sense, create a new way, a new path. So you're blazing, you're trailblazing. And what's needed for that is the ability to be comfortable with discomfort. So it's the ability to feel comfortable to break away from the herd, to be different, to be unique, to be yourself. And even if everybody does things one way and they're accustomed to it being a certain way, it's okay for you to bring a new way. That if you are able to connect to and see a new way that can be demonstrated or shared, that you can take up that space and you can have voice and you can express yourself. And you don't necessarily need to have the group validation, the group experience. You can work with the group. But this is a time in which there is going to be a lot more departure from the old way of life. And what's really needed is courage and discernment to see, what's really working and what's not, and what works for me and what doesn't. And for me personally, I found tradition and traditional meditation and practice oftentimes heavy. It just didn't feel, I didn't want to wear a uniform. I didn't want to wear, certain things or do certain, none of that meant that I was spiritual. And there's nothing we can do to be spiritual, because that's what we naturally are spiritual beings. So we don't ever have to prove that to anybody. We don't ever have to question, the way that we prefer to do things, even if it doesn't look like the way it's been done. So I really encourage you to take time with these beliefs. And like I said, it's like, be quiet, don't rock the boat. Sex is a sin, it needs to be controlled. Meditation is about doing it a certain way. Oftentimes what I find with people who want to bring meditation and spiritual arts into mainstream society is that they have a disconnect in their belief systems. So, meaning that because they believe that being spiritual means being poor, it might also be being spiritual or creative means making no money, being a starving artist. So there's these meanings that we unconsciously associate. to what it means to be spiritual, that I have to look a certain way and convey a certain way of being. And it has nothing to do with that. Meditation is just being who you are. And that's it. It's really that simple. But because we're accustomed to there being a split between money, spirituality, sex, all these different parts of our psyche and our system, we're used to having these things split up versus integrated. What ends up happening is that it becomes very difficult to develop the confidence to charge for your services. And right now, with people who want to be coaches and leaders and teachers, they want to be able to focus all their time and energy on their passion, but they don't have the confidence to charge what they really need to charge in our society to sustain themselves. And the truth is we have to pay for rent and we have to pay for our food, and we're part of this collective belief system that uses money. And maybe you can find a way to creatively not use money. But this is an important aspect to look at, because people are ashamed and they don't feel worthy of charging money or a lot of money for the sacred work that they do. And there's a lot of charge around this. And I would say that the way to bring this forward, especially in the West, is to charge money, because what I find is that adds to the healing value and the healing medicine of any healing or coaching agreement. Is that when people invest their money, they're investing in their energy and their resource with you, and they're committed to the process of change and transformation. So this is an example of how a belief system can really keep you stuck. And if you feel guilty, if you feel ashamed, if you feel unworthy, these types of feelings, it means that you're probably buying into a false limiting belief. So anything that drains your energy, limits what you can do, limits your potential, take time to look at those deeper beliefs that reside behind your thoughts. So sometimes we have thoughts like, oh, I can't do that, or people would think I'm not spiritual if I did it that way. And the moment you have those types of thoughts, like, is that spiritual or is that not? It's probably not a grounded belief that's working for you. So we can develop positive beliefs, beliefs that actually support us energetically and spiritually. And there's a lot of old beliefs, and some of the beliefs I brought up, maybe you believe in them, and it's okay. But those beliefs simply don't work for me. I think sex is sacred, it's good, we have sexual desire and power for a reason. It's part of our life force energy. When we integrate it, it gives us more vitality. We can cycle it through our body through meditation. There's all these aspects that we can now start to bring together through a new spiritual path, a new way that's more open and connected. And I think this is a time when a lot of people are walking away from more traditional paths, whether it be religion or certain systems where it feels like you have to be a certain way. You have to wear something or you have to do something in order to fit into that community. So I wanted to bring that up because that's a very personal thing. I think it's so important as part of becoming liberated individually. All right. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to do some heart breath meditation. And I just want to see if anybody has any questions or comments about this topic.